What happens when a flight attendant on a power trip fueled by an ugly prejudice targets the wrong passenger? On a routine flight from New York to Dallas, a simple request to switch seats ignites a firestorm of public humiliation. A flight attendant unleashes her fury on a black woman enjoying the momentary power and making an example of her. But she has no idea that the silent, dignified woman she is berating holds the fate of her career and the airline's reputation in the palm of her hand. This isn't just a story about bad customer service. It's about the catastrophic collision of arrogance and accountability at 35,000 feet. The air in the terminal at LaGuardia was a familiar symphony of chaos for Dr. Evelyn Hayes. It was a controlled chaos. She understood a world of hurried footsteps, muffled announcements, and the low, expectant hum of imminent departure. For Evelyn, an airport wasn't a place of vacation or escape. It was her office. At 42, she moved with an economy of motion and a quiet poise that often made her seem invisible, a skill she had cultivated and found invaluable in her line of work. Dressed in a simple but well-tailored pair of gray trousers, a silk blouse, and a navy blazer, she could have been a lawyer, a consultant, or a university professor. Few would ever guess she was one of the most senior and most feared anonymous safety auditors for the Federal Aviation Administration. Her mission today was a ghost ride on Aura Airlines Flight 815 to Dallas, Fort Worth. Aura Airlines was a relatively new player, all sleek marketing minimalist cabins and aggressive pricing. They were expanding fast, and with rapid expansion often came creeping complacency. The FAA had received a few low-level but persistent whispers rushed turnaround times crews stretched thin a couple of minor incident reports that were closed a little too quickly for comfort. So Evelyn was assigned to fly as a regular passenger, her eyes and ears, her only tools to observe the intricate dance of safety protocols from the inside. Her boarding pass, under the unassuming name E. Hayes, placed her in seat 12C, an aisle seat in the Comfort Plus section. It offered a few extra inches of legroom, and more importantly for her purposes, a clear view of the forward galley and the cabin crew's operations. She filed onto the aircraft along with the rest of the Zone 2 passengers, her carry-on a discreet leather satchel containing nothing more than a water bottle, a novel, and a specialized tablet that looked like a standard e-reader. As she arrived at her row, she found the other two seats already occupied. In 12A by the window sat a businessman already buried in his phone, his jacket neatly folded on his lap. In the middle seat, 12B, was a young man probably no older than 19. He was clutching the armrests before the plane had even pushed back from the gate, his face pale and beaded with a thin sheen of sweat. He was a nervous flyer, a profoundly nervous one. Evelyn offered a small, reassuring smile. "Hi there, I'm in 12C. The young man, who looked up with wide, anxious eyes, practically jumped out of the seat to let her in. "Oh, sorry, my bad," he stammered. "No trouble at all," Evelyn said kindly, swinging her satchel into the overhead bin. As she settled in, the young man, whose name she would later learn was Liam, couldn't sit still. His leg bounced, his knuckles were white, and he kept swallowing hard. Evelyn, a mother of two herself, felt a pang of maternal sympathy. The pre-flight announcements began, and with every chime and instruction, Liam's anxiety seemed to ratchet up. Then she noticed where he kept looking toward the back of the plane. His seat 12B was directly in line with the forward lavatories. The constant traffic, the flushing sounds, the people queuing up right next to his shoulder. It was a high-stress location for anyone, let alone someone terrified of flying. Evelyn glanced at her own seat, 12C, the aisle. Better, but still in the thick of it. Then she glanced a few rows back across the aisle. She saw an empty middle seat, 20E. It was a standard economy seat, squished between a sleeping woman and a teenager listening to headphones. It was by all accounts a worse seat, but it was further from the lavatory traffic tucked away in the anonymous middle of the aircraft. For someone like Liam, worse might just be better. The flight attendants were beginning their final cross-check. The lead attendant, a polished man in his late 40s named David, seemed competent and professional. His junior, however, was a different story. Her name tag read, Brenda. Brenda Miller had the sharp features and tightly wound energy of someone perpetually irritated. She moved with an aggressive briskness, slamming overhead bins shut and speaking to passengers with a clipped, impatient tone. Evelyn made a small mental note. Attitude, unprofessional, potentially problematic in a crisis. Ignoring Brenda, Evelyn leaned towards Liam. "Excuse me," she said softly, waiting for him to make eye contact. "I know this is a strange question, but you seem a little anxious. Would you prefer my seat? It's on the aisle, a little more space to stretch." Liam looked at her, surprised. "Oh no, I couldn't. This is a Comfort Plus seat. The airline would charge for that." Evelyn waved a dismissive hand. "Don't you worry about that. I fly a lot. It really doesn't matter to me. But sometimes a different spot can make all the difference when you're feeling nervous." His gratitude was immediate and immense. "Really? Are you sure?" "Absolutely," she said. "We can just, ma'am." The voice was sharp as a shard of glass. Both Evelyn and Liam looked up. It was Brenda. She was standing in the aisle, hands on her hips, a look of profound suspicion etched on her face. Her eyes were fixed solely on Evelyn. "What do you think you're doing?" Brenda demanded, her voice loud enough to turn the heads of passengers in the surrounding rows. Evelyn remained calm. "Hello? This young man is a bit of a nervous flyer. I was just offering him my aisle seat. We were about to switch." Brenda's eyes narrowed. She scanned Evelyn from head to toe, her gaze lingering for a moment on Evelyn's dark skin, her simple but elegant clothes. An ugly, instantaneous calculation seemed to occur in her mind. A black woman in a premium seat. A nervous white kid next to her. The narrative to Brenda wrote itself. "Ma'am, you are not authorized to make seat changes," Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a Comfort Plus seat. His boarding pass is for a Comfort Plus seat. Your boarding pass is for this seat. There will be no switching." Evelyn's eyebrows rose slightly. "I understand it's a premium seat. I paid for it, and I'm willingly giving it to another passenger. It's a simple no-cost exchange to help someone feel more comfortable. We just need to inform the crew for the manifest, which is what I'm doing now." This calm, logical rebuttal seemed to enrage Brenda further. It was a direct challenge to her authority, and from someone she had already stereotyped and dismissed. "It doesn't matter if you paid for it," Brenda snapped, emphasizing the word, as if Evelyn couldn't possibly have. "Airline policy prohibits unauthorized seat reassignments. It creates confusion with the passenger manifest and with service." She then turned to Liam, her voice softening into a patronizing coo. "Sir, are you okay? Is this woman bothering you?" Liam, already anxious now, looked mortified. He was caught in the middle of a confrontation he wanted no part of. "No, not at all. She was just being nice. He stammered, his voice trailing off under Brenda's withering glare. "Please return to your assigned seat, sir," Brenda commanded him, then turned her full attention back to Evelyn. "And you need to understand that the rules on this aircraft are set by us, not by the passengers. People can't just decide to sit wherever they feel like it." The subtext was thick and suffocating. "People like you." The public nature of the confrontation was a deliberate choice. Brenda wasn't just enforcing a rule, she was making a point using Evelyn as an example. The businessman in 12A was now openly staring, a smirk playing on his lips. Other passengers were murmuring. Evelyn felt the familiar hot sting of humiliation, but her training, her entire professional life, was built on a foundation of unshakable composure. She would not give Brenda the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. "I am well aware of FAA regulations," Evelyn stated, her voice even and dangerously quiet. "Regulation 121, 589. Regarding the passenger manifest is for weight balance and identification. A simple notification to the purser is all that's required for a seat change within the same cabin zone. It is not a matter of airline policy when it concerns passenger comfort and crew notification." The mention of a specific FAA regulation number was like a lit match in a room full of gasoline. Brenda's face, already flushed with anger, turned a deep, blotchy red. For a flight attendant to be quoted regulations by a passenger was the ultimate insult. It wasn't just a challenge anymore. It was an open declaration of war. Brenda Miller felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. Who did this woman think she was, quoting regulations? To her, Brenda had been flying for 7 years. She'd dealt with every kind of passenger, the drunks, the entitled, the slobs, the complainers. But this was different. This was a direct public undermining of her authority. And coming from this woman so calm, so articulate, so smugly confident in a seat Brenda felt she didn't belong in, it was intolerable. "FAA regulations are interpreted and implemented by the airline," Brenda shot back, her voice rising in volume and pitch. "And our policy for safety and security is that you sit in the seat you were assigned. End of discussion. I am not going to argue with you." "I'm not arguing," Evelyn replied, her tone still maddeningly level. "I'm stating a fact and making a reasonable request. I am asking to cede my premium seat to a fellow passenger who is in distress. It's an act of kindness. Why are you turning it into a federal incident?" The word kindness seemed to break something in Brenda. To her, it was a lie. This had to be a scam. Maybe the woman knew the kid. Maybe she was trying to get a refund by claiming she didn't get her seat. Maybe she was just one of those people who live to create drama. The possibilities, all filtered through Brenda's prejudice, were endless. "Ma'am, I am going to ask you one last time to sit down and be quiet," Brenda said, pointing a finger at Evelyn. "If you continue to be a disruptive passenger, I will have the captain involved, and you will be removed from this flight." The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Being labeled disruptive was the ultimate scarlet letter for an air traveler. It could get you banned, put on a list. It was a threat designed to intimidate, to crush any further resistance. The businessman in 12A, a man in a crisp suit who looked to be in his 50s, now decided to weigh in. "Just listen to her, for God's sake," he said with a sigh, not even looking at Evelyn, but directing his comment to the air. "Some people have to make everything difficult. The flight attendant knows the rules. Let's get this plane in the air. Let's call him Mr. Harrison." His support emboldened Brenda. She now had an ally. She had validation. Evelyn gave Mr. Harrison a brief, cold glance before turning back to Brenda. She saw that reasoning was futile. This was no longer about a rule. It was about power. And Brenda was determined to win. At that moment, David, the senior flight attendant, arrived, drawn by the commotion. "Brenda, what's going on here? We need to close the door." Brenda turned to him, her voice a torrent of self-righteous justification. "David, this passenger in 12C is refusing to follow instructions. She's trying to switch seats with the passenger in 12B without authorization and got aggressive when I told her it's against policy. Now she's arguing about FAA regulations and delaying the flight." David looked from Brenda's furious face to Evelyn's composed one. He saw the nervous kid Liam cowering in his seat. As the purser, his job was to de-escalate. but his loyalty was also to his crew. "Ma'am," David said, his tone more conciliatory than Brenda's, but still firm. "I understand you're trying to be helpful, but Brenda is correct. Seat changes during the boarding process can cause issues. For the sake of getting everyone on their way, could I please ask you to just take your assigned seat for now?" Evelyn looked at him. She saw a man taking the path of least resistance. He wanted the problem to go away, and the easiest way to do that was to placate his agitated colleague and dismiss the passenger. He wasn't interested in the why. He was only interested in the quiet. This, Evelyn knew, was a failure of leadership. A quiet but critical one. "Very well," Evelyn said, her voice betraying no emotion. She knew when a battle was lost, and when it was more strategic to retreat and observe. "I will sit here." Brenda flashed a triumphant smirk. She had won. She had put the uppity passenger in her place. But she wasn't done. Winning wasn't enough. She needed to rub it in. She needed to complete the humiliation. She scanned the cabin, and her eyes landed on a man in seat 15G, an aisle seat in the first row of regular economy. He had been grumbling under his breath since he boarded, unhappy with his position right behind the Comfort Plus curtain. He was a frequent flyer, one of Aura's Platinum members. Brenda knew him by sight. A malicious idea sparked in her mind. A twist of the knife. She walked over to the man in 15G. "Sir," she said, her voice now sweet as honey. "I see you're one of our Platinum flyers. We've had a seat become available in Comfort Plus. As a thank you for your loyalty, we'd like to offer you a complimentary upgrade." The man's grumbling ceased instantly. "Well, it's about time," he said, grabbing his briefcase. Brenda led him to the front. She stopped right next to Evelyn. She gestured grandly to seat 12B, the middle seat Liam was still occupying. "We're going to put you right here, sir. In 12B. Liam looked up in terror. "But this is my seat." "We're shuffling some things around," Brenda said dismissively, not even looking at him. She then turned to Evelyn, her eyes gleaming with spite. "Ma'am, since you were so eager to switch seats, you've created an opportunity. We now need your seat for this upgrade. I'm going to have to move you." Evelyn stared at her. This was a breathtaking act of petty cruelty. Brenda wasn't just enforcing a rule anymore, she was inventing a new situation purely to punish her. "Where?" Evelyn asked, her voice dangerously soft. "Are you moving me to—" Brenda smiled, a thin, cruel slash across her face. "Don't worry, we've found a spot for you." She turned and pointed towards the back of the plane, across the aisle. "To seat 20E. The undesirable middle seat squeezed between the sleeping woman and the headphone-wearing teenager that Evelyn had originally considered for Liam. It was the ultimate degradation. She was being stripped of the premium seat she had paid for, which was being given away for free, and she was being exiled to one of the worst seats on the plane, all as punishment for an initial act of kindness. David the purser watched this unfold with a flicker of unease, but said nothing. He didn't intervene. Brenda was running the show. "So let me be clear," Evelyn said, her eyes locked on Brenda's. "You are involuntarily downgrading me from a seat I paid for and giving it to another passenger because I offered to switch with a nervous flyer. I am reassigning seats for operational necessity." Brenda recited the lie, sounding smooth and practiced. "Please take your new seat, ma'am, now, or we will deplane you." The entire drama was now complete. The humiliation was total. Slowly, deliberately, Evelyn stood up. She didn't look at the smug, upgraded passenger settling into 12B. She didn't look at the mortified face of poor Liam, who was now being directed by Brenda to take the Platinum Flyer's old seat in 15G. She looked only at Brenda. "I understand," Evelyn said. Then, with a dignity that seemed to suck the air out of the immediate vicinity, she gathered her things and walked down the aisle to seat 20E. As she squeezed past the other passengers into the cramped middle seat, the cabin door closed. The engines began to whine. The flight was underway. And Dr. Evelyn Hayes, now seated in the cramped discomfort of 20E, reached into her satchel. She pulled out the device that looked like an e-reader. With a few discreet taps, she unlocked it, revealing not a novel, but the stark official template of an FAA field audit report. She typed in the flight number, Aura 815. She typed in the date. And then under the section marked Initial Observations, she began to write. Every word Brenda had said, every action she had taken, every rule she had broken and twisted for her own vindictive purposes. The storm had passed, but the reckoning had just begun. The atmosphere inside the aluminum tube of Aura Flight 815 had become electric. The moment Dr. Evelyn Hayes uttered the number of a federal regulation, it was as if she had flipped a switch, transforming a simple disagreement into a profound and personal war. For Brenda Miller, the sound of FAA Regulation 121.589 was not information. It was a declaration of contempt. It was the calm, articulate voice of a passenger telling her in front of a captive audience that she was ignorant of her own profession. A hot, blinding rage, potent and suffocating, surged through Brenda. It started as a knot in her stomach and bloomed into a fire in her chest, flushing her neck and face with a blotchy crimson tide. The ambient noise of the cabin, the hum of the ventilation, the distant murmur of other passengers faded into a dull roar in her ears. Her world narrowed to a single focal point, the composed, dark-skinned woman in seat 12C who had dared to challenge her. Who was this woman? This was Brenda's aircraft, her domain. She was the one who held the power here, the authority to grant or deny, to ensure safety, to command respect. It was a small kingdom, perhaps, but it was hers for the duration of the flight. For 7 years she had navigated this world, learning that a sharp tone and an unwavering assertion of policy were the only tools that commanded obedience. Kindness was a weakness passengers exploited. And this woman, with her expensive-looking blazer and her infuriatingly serene expression, was not just exploiting kindness. She was mocking Brenda's authority altogether. The thought that this woman might actually be right about the regulation was a possibility so infuriating Brenda couldn't even entertain it. It had to be a bluff, a tactic from some self-important lawyer or executive who thought rules didn't apply to her. "Let me be perfectly clear, ma'am," Brenda said, her voice tight and shaking with barely suppressed fury. She leaned in closer, invading Evelyn's personal space, using her physical presence as a tool of intimidation. FAA regulations are not your business. They are mine. They are interpreted and implemented by this airline and my senior crew members. Our policy for the safety and security of this flight, and for an accurate manifest in case of an emergency, is that you sit in the seat you were assigned. This is the end of the discussion. I am not going to stand here and argue with you while we have a plane to get in the air. Evelyn did not shrink back. She held her ground, her gaze steady. I am not arguing, Flight Attendant Miller. I am stating a fact and making a request rooted in compassion. Your characterization of this as an argument is a deliberate escalation. This young man is in distress. She gestured subtly toward Liam, who now looked as if he wanted to evaporate. A simple accommodation is all that is required. Why are you choosing to turn this into a confrontation? The accusation that Brenda was choosing this path was the final straw. It implied Brenda was the unreasonable one, the source of the conflict. The businessman in 12A, Mr. Harrison, who had been watching the drama with unconcealed amusement, decided it was time to lend his support. "Oh, for heaven's sake," he sighed dramatically, loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear clearly. Just do what she says. She's the one in charge. Some people have to turn everything into a federal case. Let's get this show on the road." He looked at Brenda with a commiserating eye roll, a gesture of solidarity that felt like a splash of gasoline on the fire of her rage. He was on her side. The respectable suit-wearing man understood. This woman was the problem. His comment emboldened Brenda immeasurably. She straightened up, feeling the support of her audience. She was not just a flight attendant now. She was a defender of order against chaos. "Ma'am, this is your final warning," Brenda declared, her voice ringing with renewed righteous authority. She pointed a stern finger at Evelyn. "You will cease this behavior immediately. If you continue to be a disruptive and non-compliant passenger, I will have no choice but to notify the captain that you are a security risk, and you will be met at the gate and removed from this aircraft. Do you understand me?" The threat, ugly and potent, hung in the air. The label security risk was the nuclear option. It was a permanent black mark, a nightmare of questioning and potential blacklisting. It was a threat designed to terrify any passenger into submission. It was at this critical juncture that David the purser finally arrived. He moved down the aisle with a practiced, placating smile, his eyes taking in the scene, Brenda rigid with anger. The pale, terrified student, the smug businessman, and Evelyn, whose composure seemed almost alien in the emotionally charged environment. "Brenda, what's the holdup here?" David asked, his voice a low, calming baritone. "We need to button this up and close the main door." Brenda turned to him, the words spilling out in a torrent of vindication. "David, thank God. This passenger in 12C is refusing to follow crew instruction. She instigated an unauthorized seat change, and when I told her it was against policy, she became aggressive and argumentative. She's quoting regulations at me, holding up the entire flight and causing a major disturbance." Brenda's summary was a masterpiece of self-serving fiction, painting herself as the calm professional and Evelyn as the unhinged troublemaker. David's professional smile tightened. He was the manager here. His job was to solve problems, and the fastest solution was always the one that created the least friction for the crew and the schedule. He looked at Evelyn, assessing her. He didn't see an aggressive person. He saw a calm, well-dressed black woman who was meeting his gaze with unnerving intelligence. But he also saw his colleague Brenda, who was clearly agitated and on the verge of a full-blown meltdown. De-escalation in David's playbook meant placating the most volatile element. In this case, that was Brenda. "Ma'am," David began, his tone oozing practiced diplomacy. "My name is David Lewis. I'm the purser on this flight. I understand you're trying to be helpful, and we appreciate that spirit. However, for operational reasons, we really do need passengers to remain in their ticketed seats during the boarding process." Brenda is correct. It helps us maintain an accurate count for weight and balance and service delivery. For the sake of getting all these nice people on their way to Dallas, could I please ask you to just settle into your seat for now? We can address any concerns you have once we're in the air. Evelyn listened to his speech, every word of it, a careful corporate sidestep of the actual issue. He hadn't asked what happened. He hadn't addressed Liam's distress. He hadn't questioned Brenda's theatrical version of events. He had simply validated his colleague and asked the passenger to submit. It was a quiet but profound failure of leadership, a choice to prioritize convenience over correctness. Evelyn knew in that moment that the system was compromised. David wasn't a solution. He was part of the problem. With a slow, almost imperceptible nod, Evelyn conceded. There was no point in arguing with a man whose primary goal was to make the problem vanish. "Very well, Mr. Lewis," she said, her voice betraying not a hint of defeat. "I will remain in my seat." Brenda could have stopped there. She had won. The purser had backed her play. The disruptive passenger had been silenced. She could have returned to her duties, the victor of the skirmish. But victory wasn't enough. She needed to salt the earth. She needed to punish Evelyn for the audacity of her challenge, for the humiliation Brenda felt she had endured. A wicked, spiteful idea born of pure malice began to form in her mind. It was a way to deliver a final crushing blow while disguising it as an act of service. Her eyes scanned the cabin and landed on a man in seat 15G, an aisle seat in the first row of standard economy. He was a portly man in a golf shirt, a platinum-level frequent flyer who had been audibly grumbling about his lack of an upgrade since he boarded. He was the perfect pawn. Brenda's expression shifted, the hard lines of her anger melting away to be replaced by a saccharine customer service smile. She strode over to him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice now sweet as honey. "I noticed you're one of our most valued Platinum members. We've had a last-minute seat open up in our Comfort Plus cabin, and as a small token of our appreciation for your loyalty, we'd be delighted to offer you a complimentary upgrade." The man's sour face lit up. "Well, finally," he boomed. "It's about time my loyalty paid off." He eagerly grabbed his carry-on. Brenda led him forward, her path taking her directly back to row 12. She stopped right beside Evelyn, a triumphant glint in her eyes. This was her checkmate. She gestured magnanimously to the middle seat, 12B, where Liam was still sitting. "We're going to put you right here, sir." Liam looked up, his eyes wide with confusion and panic. "Wait, this is my seat." "We're just doing a little shuffling to accommodate everyone," Brenda said, waving a dismissive hand at him. Her full, venomous attention then returned to Evelyn. "Ma'am, since you were so eager to change your seating arrangement, you've created a domino effect. We now require your seat for this upgraded passenger." The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of the act stunned the nearby passengers into silence. This wasn't policy. This wasn't operational necessity. This was a public, punitive act of revenge. Brenda was weaponizing her authority in the most personal way imaginable. "So let me be absolutely clear," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to an icy, dangerous calm as she absorbed the full scope of Brenda's malice. "You are ordering me out of the premium seat that I purchased to give it as a free upgrade to another passenger as a direct punishment for my earlier request. I am reassigning seats to best serve the needs of the cabin." Brenda retorted the lie, tasting sweet on her tongue. "And we have found another seat for you." She pointed a single perfectly manicured finger across the aisle and several rows back to seat 20E, the cramped, undesirable middle seat tucked between two strangers that Evelyn had initially spotted as a potential refuge for Liam. It was the ultimate humiliation to be cast out and sent to the very seat that represented the opposite of her purchased ticket. "You will move to seat 20E. Now," Brenda commanded, her voice low and final. "Or your final warning is rescinded and you will be deplaned. The choice is yours." Time seemed to slow down. Evelyn looked into Brenda's eyes and saw nothing but the hollow victory of a petty tyrant. She saw the smug face of Mr. Harrison. She saw the discomfort on David's face, a man who knew this was wrong, but lacked the courage to stop it. She felt the dozens of pairs of eyes on her watching this raw, ugly drama unfold. A hot flush of anger and humiliation washed over her, and for a fleeting second she wanted to unleash the full force of her position right there and then. But she smothered it. An emotional outburst was what Brenda wanted. It would validate her narrative of the disruptive passenger. Evelyn's training, her discipline, her entire professional ethos took over. She made a conscious, critical decision. The confrontation was over. The observation had begun. This incident was no longer a personal insult. It was Exhibit A. With a dignity that seemed to create a vacuum in the tense cabin, Evelyn rose from her seat. She gathered her leather satchel from the floor. She did not say another word to Brenda. She did not look at the upgraded passenger, now eagerly claiming his prize. She simply turned and began her walk. It was a long walk to row 20. Every step felt like a mile the aisle, a gauntlet of staring, pitying, and judgmental eyes. She reached the row, murmured, "Excuse me," to the woman on the aisle, and squeezed past her into the tight confines of seat 20E. The fabric felt cheaper, the space constricting. She buckled the seatbelt. Moments later, the main cabin door closed with a heavy final thud. The engines began their high-pitched whine. Brenda, watching from the front, allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. She had won. Completely and utterly. But in the dimming light of the cabin, as the plane pushed back from the gate, Evelyn Hayes reached into her satchel. She bypassed her novel and her water bottle. Her fingers found the cool, smooth case of her government-issued tablet. She powered it on. The screen flickered to life, not with a book's cover, but with the stark institutional header of an FAA field audit report. She tapped the screen, the cursor blinking expectantly. Under the section titled Incident Log, Boarding Process, she began to type, her fingers moving with silent, deadly precision. Date. Current date. Flight Aura 815 LGA-DFW. Subject F.A. Brenda Miller. Time 10:15 ET. Initiating event. Gross misconduct, abuse of authority, and punitive passenger reassignment. The inferno of Brenda's making had been sparked. Now Evelyn, the quiet watcher in the heart of the flames, would document how it burned. The landing at Dallas, Fort Worth, was smooth, a testament to the skill of the pilots in the cockpit. The gentle bump of the tires on the tarmac, followed by the powerful, reassuring roar of the reverse thrusters, sent a wave of relief through the cabin. The 3-hour journey was over. For most passengers, the spell of suspended reality was breaking, replaced by the imminent concerns of connecting flights, baggage claims, and waiting family members. The low hum of the engines spooled down, and the familiar sounds of a grounded aircraft began to fill the air. The clicks of unbuckling seat belts, the rustle of clothing, the low murmur of conversations resuming. Brenda Miller, releasing the harness on her jump seat, felt a surge of satisfaction. The flight was done. The difficult passenger, the woman in 20E, was a distant memory, a minor irritation successfully squashed. In Brenda's mind, she had done her job perfectly. She had enforced the rules, maintained order, and even rewarded a loyal customer with an upgrade. She felt a smug sense of accomplishment, a little thrill of power affirmed. She stood up, smoothing her uniform, a professionally pleasant smile already forming on her lips, ready to bid farewell to the passengers she had so expertly managed. She caught the eye of Mr. Harrison in 12A, who gave her a subtle approving nod, a shared acknowledgement of their victory over the disruptive woman. The plane taxied for what felt like an eternity, winding its way through the labyrinthine pathways of the massive airport. Outside the windows, the sprawling Texas landscape gave way to a forest of tail fins and the imposing architecture of the terminals. Finally, with a gentle nudge, Aura Flight 815 came to a complete stop at Gate C-22. The final melodic chime echoed through the cabin as Captain Mitchell switched off the seatbelt sign. It was the signal for the charge. Instantly, the aisle filled with passengers eager to deplane a wave of humanity, grabbing bags from overhead bins and jostling for position. Brenda positioned herself near the forward galley, her smile fixed in place. "Have a great day," she chirped at one passenger. "Thanks for flying Aura," she said to another. It was routine. It was over. Then the routine shattered. A click from the PA system silenced the cabin's clamor. It wasn't the captain's voice. It was David the purser, and his tone was wrong. It was tight-strained, stripped of its usual professional warmth. "Ladies and gentlemen, a moment of your attention, please. We apologize for the delay, but we have been instructed by the flight deck to ask all passengers to please return to your seats. Please clear the aisle and take your seats immediately." A collective groan rippled through the aircraft. Annoyance was palpable. A man in the aisle right in front of Brenda grumbled, "You've got to be kidding me. I have a connection to make." Brenda's smile faltered. She shot a confused, irritated look toward the cockpit door. What now? A medical issue? A problem with the jet bridge? This was going to ruin their on-time statistics. "Please, everyone, you heard the purser. If you could just step back and take a seat, I'm sure it will only be a moment," she announced, her voice losing its cheerful edge. The passengers grudgingly complied, sinking back into their seats with sighs and resentful glares. The cabin fell into a tense, expectant silence, broken only by the hum of the auxiliary power. A full minute passed. Then another. The tension thickened. Another click from the PA system. It was David's voice again, and this time it was laced with a palpable nervousness that made the hairs on Brenda's arms stand up. "We have been asked by ground control and the flight deck to make the following announcement," he said, his voice faltering slightly. Will Dr. Evelyn Hayes please identify herself to the flight crew?" The name hung in the air, alien and specific. Hayes, Brenda's mind blanked for a second. The name was a faint echo, a half-forgotten detail from the start of the flight. Her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for a hand, a voice. Who was Dr. Hayes? A physician needed for a medical emergency. Then, like a punch to the gut, the memory slammed into her. E. Hayes. Seat 12C. The woman she had exiled to the back of the plane. Her eyes, wide with a sudden sickening premonition, shot down the length of the cabin. In the cramped confines of row 20, a figure stirred. Slowly, with a grace and deliberation that seemed to draw all light and attention in the cabin towards her, Dr. Evelyn Hayes unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. She didn't look angry or triumphant. She looked like someone about to begin a day's work. Every single passenger from the front to the back twisted in their seats to watch. Mr. Harrison's smirk had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. The platinum passenger in Evelyn's original seat looked down, suddenly finding the tray table fascinating. "I am Dr. Hayes." Evelyn's voice was not loud, but it possessed a crystalline clarity that sliced through the cabin's thick silence. It carried to the front of the plane as if she had her own microphone. Brenda felt the blood drain from her face. A cold, metallic taste filled her mouth. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. The scene felt surreal, a nightmare playing out in slow motion. As Evelyn began to walk up the aisle, each step was a drumbeat marking the seconds of Brenda's life that were about to be irrevocably ruined. The passengers parted for her as if by royal decree, their faces a mixture of awe and dawning comprehension. This was no ordinary passenger. Just as Evelyn reached the forward galley, the cockpit door swung open. Captain Mitchell emerged, his face a mask of grim professionalism. He was followed by a man in a dark Aura Airlines corporate suit, his ID badge identifying him as a senior ground operations manager. The manager was pale, his eyes darting nervously. They were both waiting for her. Evelyn walked right past Brenda, who felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a dread so profound it felt like a physical weight. Evelyn didn't even grant her a glance. She stopped directly in front of the captain and the manager. "Captain Mitchell," she said, her voice the epitome of calm authority. "I am Dr. Evelyn Hayes." She reached into the inner pocket of her navy blazer and withdrew a small, unassuming black leather wallet. With a flick of her wrist, she opened it. It was not a wallet for money or credit cards. On one side, nestled in a custom-cut recess, was a gleaming gold-embossed shield of the United States Department of Transportation. On the other side, behind a clear window, was a federal identification card with her photograph and name, Dr. Evelyn M. Hayes. Aviation Safety Inspector. Federal Aviation Administration Office of Aviation Safety and Compliance. She stated, her voice sharp and precise. Each word was perfectly enunciated, each syllable a nail being hammered into Brenda's coffin. "Captain, your flight, Aura 815, has been the subject of a covert operational performance and safety audit. This audit is now concluded." A collective gasp went through the first few rows. The ground manager visibly swallowed hard. Captain Mitchell's jaw tightened, the muscles in his cheek clenching. He knew. He knew the moment he got the call from dispatch that an FAA ghostwriter was on board and had requested a meeting on the jet bridge, that his day, and possibly his crew's careers, had taken a disastrous turn. Brenda's mind was a maelstrom of panic. FAA. Auditor. Inspector. The words screamed in her head. The woman she had bullied, threatened, and humiliated held a power she couldn't even comprehend. The entire flight, every smug smile, every careless action, every spiteful thought replayed in her mind, not as a memory of triumph, but as a highlight reel of her own self-destruction. "Dr. Hayes," the captain finally said, his voice a low, controlled rumble of damage control. "I was informed of your presence only upon landing. I understand from the initial dispatch report that there was an issue during the boarding process." Evelyn's gaze, cold and direct, finally shifted. It swept past the captain and landed for the first time directly on Brenda Miller. Brenda flinched as if the look were a physical blow. "Captain, issue is an insufficient word for what occurred," Evelyn stated, her eyes still locked on Brenda. "It was a gross failure of professional conduct and a flagrant abuse of authority. Let me be specific. At approximately 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time, I was in my assigned seat, 12C. I attempted to perform a consensual seat exchange with passenger Liam Peterson in 12B, a minor, who was displaying clear and significant signs of aerophobia. My intention was to offer a simple act of compassion to alleviate his distress." She paused, letting the silence amplify her next words. "My attempt at kindness was met with immediate, unprovoked aggression from flight attendant Brenda Miller. Without any attempt to assess the situation, Ms. Miller publicly admonished me baselessly, accused me of attempting to circumvent airline policy, and escalated the confrontation when I remained calm. When I correctly cited the relevant FAA regulation that permits such changes with crew notification, she interpreted it as a personal challenge and threatened me with removal from this aircraft as a disruptive passenger." David the purser, who had been hovering near the galley, looked down at the floor, his face ashen. He could feel Evelyn's condemnation, including him without her even saying his name yet. But the unprofessional conduct did not end there. Evelyn continued, her voice a relentless, factual torrent. In a breathtaking act of vindictive punishment, Ms. Miller then invented an operational necessity to involuntarily downgrade me from my paid Comfort Plus seat to a middle seat in the main cabin. She then gave my seat free of charge to another passenger. This entire series of events constituted a severe breach of crew resource management principles. It created a hostile, intimidating, and wholly unnecessary conflict initiated and perpetuated solely by Ms. Miller. She took a breath, and the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath with her. However, Captain, failures in customer service, while egregious, are not my primary concern. My primary concern is safety, and what I observed after being relocated was a cascade of safety violations that demonstrate a systemic culture of complacency and negligence aboard this aircraft originating with Ms. Miller. Captain Mitchell's face was now stone. This was the heart of the matter. At 11:48 a.m., during your turbulence advisory flight, Attendant Miller failed to conduct a proper safety check of the forward galley. I personally witnessed her fail to engage the primary locking mechanism on beverage cart C1. The red line indicator was clearly visible from my seat. More alarmingly, a full carafe of fresh coffee was left on its heating element without the safety retaining latch being engaged. Captain, you are aware that in a severe shear or updraft, that unsecured pot of 190-degree liquid becomes a scalding projectile. That cart becomes a 1,000-pound battering ram in the aisle. It is not a minor oversight. It is gross negligence. Brenda's legs felt weak. She leaned against the galley wall for support, her heart hammering against her ribs. She remembered it all. Her carelessness. Her rush. Furthermore, Evelyn's voice was like a surgeon's scalpel, dissecting every failure. The exit row briefing was a sham. Ms. Miller recited the words from memory while the designated passengers were distracted and wearing headphones. She made no attempt to gain their attention or receive the explicit verbal confirmation required by law. I also documented a call light from an elderly passenger in seat 22B that was left unanswered for 7 minutes and 24 seconds, while Ms. Miller and Purser Lewis stood feet away engaged in a non-essential personal conversation. This is not just poor service, it's a dangerous disregard for passenger welfare. She finally acknowledged David directly, her gaze sweeping over him with cold disappointment. Purser Lewis, your failure to de-escalate the initial incident and your failure to supervise your junior crew constitute a critical lapse in leadership. You enabled this behavior. Evelyn turned back to the captain and the ground manager. Her voice dropped slightly, becoming even more formal, if that were possible. My full field report will be transmitted to the FAA Central Office and the Certificate Holding District Office for Aura Airlines within the hour. Based on my findings, I am officially recommending a full-scale, top-to-bottom investigation into Aura's flight attendant training protocols, oversight procedures, and CRM programs. Effective immediately, this entire flight crew is grounded pending the outcome of that investigation. You will all be escorted from this aircraft for a mandatory post-incident debriefing, as well as mandatory drug and alcohol screening as is standard procedure following the documentation of significant safety failures. The finality of her declaration was absolute. Then she delivered the coup de grace, her eyes finding Brenda's one last time. Flight Attendant Miller, your license to operate as a flight attendant is a privilege granted by the Federal Aviation Administration contingent on your ability to perform as a safety professional first and foremost. Today, you failed that responsibility in every conceivable way. You prioritized your ego over human compassion and aircraft safety. Therefore, I will be making a formal recommendation to the administrator for the immediate and indefinite suspension of your operating certificate. A strangled sob finally escaped Brenda's lips. Her career wasn't just over, it was being publicly and methodically annihilated. No. She whispered the word, a pathetic puff of air. I was just following the rules. Evelyn took one step closer, her voice now a low, confidential murmur that was somehow more chilling than her public pronouncements. It was meant for Brenda and Brenda alone. No, Ms. Miller, you weren't following rules, you were following your prejudice. You looked at me, and you made a judgment. You decided who I was and you acted on that assumption. Today your prejudice flew into the wrong person. With that final devastating diagnosis, Dr. Evelyn Hayes turned her back on the wreckage of Brenda's career. She gave a curt professional nod to the captain. "Gentlemen, I will meet you on the jet bridge. We have a great deal to discuss." She stepped off the aircraft and into the sterile corridor of the gate, her composure absolute, her mission complete. Behind her, the stunned silence of the cabin was finally broken by the quiet, desperate, and utterly hopeless sound of Brenda Miller beginning to weep. The hard karma had landed, and its judgment was final. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic, not just for Brenda Miller, but for Aura Airlines. Dr. Hayes's detailed report triggered a formal FAA inquiry that delved deep into the airline's corporate culture. What it found was a pattern of cutting corners on training and pressuring crews to prioritize on-time departures over meticulous procedure. Brenda Miller was, as predicted, fired. With a permanent black mark on her FAA record for endangerment and unprofessional conduct, her career in aviation was over. She lost her appeal, her union protection evaporating in the face of Evelyn's irrefutable evidence. David the purser received a lengthy suspension and a demotion for his failure to lead. The story whispered among airline crews became a cautionary tale, a legend about the day a flight attendant's casual cruelty collided with the quiet power of an unseen guardian. It serves as a stark reminder that the person you underestimate, the one you dismiss based on prejudice or arrogance, might just be the one holding the clipboard. True authority isn't loud or flashy. It's quiet, observant, and it holds everyone accountable. Thank you for listening to this real-life drama. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more tales of justice and accountability. And let us know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone on a power trip picked the absolute wrong person to mess with? We'd love to hear your story. Until next time, fly safe.